G'day, welcome to Bradley's Bakehouse, where today we're going to be making some white bread. Got one formula that we're going to make 3 different things out of. We're going to make just a nice, simple white sandwich loaf. We're going to make like a little bit more of an artisanal Vienna thing that we're going to bake in a Dutch oven and do some little fancy stuff with. And we're also going to make some rolls. We're going to make 4 little round rolls that'd be great for like burgers, and we're going to make 4 like long hot dog rolls. Making straight up white bread, I think, is a step that a lot of people skip when they get into bread making. I think a lot of people want to go straight to making like the really cool, gorgeous, Instagrammy, like 80% hydration sourdoughs. But I think if you're just starting out especially, learning how to just develop gluten and make a really good solid white loaf that's like properly proved and everything, I think is a really good skill to learn, and I don't think you should skip it. With that said, let's crack on to our first recipe. Okay, so for ingredients, we've got bread flour. This is from a company called Lighthouse. This is very commonly available in like all Australian supermarkets, all 2 of them. It's got 11.9 grams of protein per 100 grams, so it's 11.9% protein. That is not the be-all and end-all of bread flour, but for what we're doing today, it's gonna suit us just fine. We've got instant yeast. This is Lowen's, again, commonly available at supermarket. We've got bread improver. This is a combination of enzymes and a couple different vitamins. Just helps yeast act more consistently and perform better. If you feel a bit weird about using something called bread improver, it's a great product with a really unfortunate name. We're going to be leaving it out of the Vienna that we're going to be making. And we've also got some water that's just a little bit below room temperature. We'll talk about why in a sec. And it's just got a little bit of vegetable oil in there. I am going to be using my Kenwood stand mixer for the sandwich loaf and also for the rolls, but the Vienna we're going to knead by hand, because I know not everyone has a stand mixer. We're going to do that by hand just to sort of see what the results are like. One piece of equipment that I'm not going to budge on is a digital scale. If you want to get into making bread at home, if you want to get into baking at home, buy a decent scale. This is quite a fancy coffee scale that's accurate to 0.1 of a gram. You don't necessarily need something like that, but you'll make your life so much easier if you start using a scale and start using recipes based in grams rather than ounces. Once you stop using ounces for 5 minutes, you realize how silly they are. Please get a scale. All the exact measurements and stuff are going to be down in the description below. There are 2 phases when it comes to mixing dough together. The first is sometimes called the slow phase, or the incorporation phase, or the mixing phase, or anything like that. It is usually a slow, gentle mix to combine the ingredients. The second phase is where we're actually going to start kneading it and start establishing a gluten matrix. We need to establish a gluten matrix because the gluten is what's going to capture the gas that's produced by the yeast and allow our bread to rise, right? That's what gives you that light, open, fluffy goodness. Let's crack on with our mixing phase, right? So in goes the flour, improver, yeast, and we're going to hold back the salt in the water for just a second. We're going to drop this down, and just on the slowest speed that we've got, we're just going to give this a quick little dry mix just to make sure all of the dry ingredients are a little bit better dispersed. Cool. So once that's done, we're going to pour our water and our oil in, and we're going to mix that together on that same low speed for about 3 minutes. You might have noticed that I haven't put salt in. We're holding back our salt. I'm going to show you a little trick to help you establish a little bit more gluten. But for now, we're going to start this 3 minutes or so, just till it's like a shaggy, cohesive mass. Okay, so that's been mixing for about 3 minutes, and it's like a pretty shaggy, not very appetizing looking sort of like rough ball. But to illustrate a point, see this ball here, right? If I try to grab some of this, do you see how it just rips? Right? Do you see how there's no elasticity in it at all? It puts up no resistance, it just rips. That's because we haven't established any gluten, right? So gluten's gonna lend like a smoothness and a suppleness and an elasticity to the dough, right? Now, these home stand mixers, as much as we love them, will never be able to establish the same kind of gluten as like a big boy spiral mixer with a breaker bar that you'd see in like a commercial bakery. So we need to kind of employ a few tricks. And the first one of these tricks is called fermentolyse. So we've got everything combined, the flour's starting to hydrate. What we're gonna do is take a plate and we're gonna put it over the top of the bowl, and we're just gonna leave that alone for about 10 minutes. And you will be amazed how much gluten will form and how much stretchier and more elastic and easier to handle that dough is in just 10 minutes. This is a trick I actually got from a guy who was helping me prepare for the last competition that I was in, because it was a bread baking competition and we had to use planetary mixers, which was like pretty bizarre to me. I'd never really done a lot of like dough mixing on like commercial planetary mixers. And he was like, man, just fermentolyse everything. Just like mix it without salt and just like let it sit. And he was totally right. I didn't win. Sorry, Connor. But like the big boy mixer with like the dough spiral and like the huge engine and like the massive amount of, those things develop gluten almost as fast as your mum developed fillings for me.
You can't leave that in.
Hmm?
You can't leave that in.
Watch me. Okay, so 10 minutes has passed and it's still looking pretty shaggy. It's still looking pretty weird. Before where it just ripped, have a look at this. See how it's starting to stretch? Yeah, that's gluten developing. That's exactly what we want. Now we are gonna have to get in there and knead this for about another 8 minutes with the stand mixer here. But we've established like a base level of gluten that we didn't have before, which is gonna make our job a lot easier. This is also why we used water that was a little bit below room temperature, because this has been sitting out for about 10 minutes now. This is room temperature now. And we didn't want it to start fermenting too early by using warm water. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in with the salt. Salt's going in. We're gonna mix that on slow for about a minute, just till the salt's sort of nice and combined, and then we're gonna rank up the speed. It's about 3 on my Kenwood, kind of medium slow, I guess, for whatever you're using. It's definitely a little bit below like a medium speed, and we're gonna let that go for about 8 minutes. Okay, so that's about 8 minutes of kneading on like that medium sort of low speed. And have a look at this. See how it's clinging to the hook? So our dough's gone from a real shaggy mess, right? To being like a little bit stretchy, to being very stretchy, right? You see that? That's very good. This little trick, this little test, it's not a trick, it's common knowledge. I'm not gonna pretend it's a trick, it's common knowledge, I think, amongst the baking world. This is called window paning, right? So you take a little bit of your dough and you just sort of gently stretch it between your fingers with the goal to see if you can make a see-through plane. Yeah, see like that? So that's window painting, quite nice. Ooh, it ripped a bit though, hey? So, I'm really happy with how this is going, but I am gonna give that a couple more minutes in the bowl. What that window painting test is doing is it's testing the elasticity of your dough, right? So think of it like blowing up a balloon, right? The yeast is gonna create gas, which is like providing breath into the balloon. You want the gluten to be able to capture that gas and inflate without bursting, right? That's how you get those lovely, nice bubbles, nice, airy, light crumb. Without the gluten, you just have a dense, shitty brick. And no one wants a dense, shitty brick. Okay, so we've given that 2 more minutes of mixing, and I can already tell, based on just how lovely and stretchy this dough is, that we're done. Right? This is gonna window pane beautifully. Now, let's see what our window painting's like. It's even hard to break a little piece off. So, ooh, yeah. See how there's no rips? See how it's staying nice in one piece? So that is a very good method of testing if your gluten is established. Now that our dough's fully mixed, we're gonna turn it into a nice tight boule. This is pretty simple. You wanna get your hands sort of in like a little bit of a V, sort of like cupping a little bit, and you wanna put them on either side, and you want to just roll that back and forth, and you just want to push the outside skin underneath the dough. And then eventually all these crinkles, all of these are going to disappear, and you'll have a lovely, nice, tight boule. So that, we're just going to drop back in the bowl, put a cover on and let it sit for about 40 minutes. A lot of people will say until doubled in size. That's a reasonably good metric. I wouldn't necessarily say that you need to go that far, but double in size, you're fine. It's a good thing to look for. 40 minutes. Okay, just like magic, our sandwich dough has just about doubled in size. You can tell it's nice and strong because it's made like a ball sort of shape. So what we're gonna do with this is we're straight up just gonna fucking punch it. We're just gonna degas this, get all of that gas out of there, right? And we're gonna boule her back up. So this is an 800 gram sandwich loaf tin. It's very similar to the kind that they would use in a commercial bakery, and I know that because I flogged it from a commercial bakery. So we're gonna give that a very light spray oil. Now, when it comes to shaping a sandwich loaf, there's 2 things that need to be in the forefront of our mind the whole time, right? One of those is surface tension. The second one of those is the seam. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna flip it over, and we're gonna press it out with our fingertips, not necessarily dimpling it, but definitely like flattening it, right? So we've got something that kind of like vaguely resembles a rectangle. Pull those edges out a little bit, particularly towards the bottom, right? And we're gonna take the very tippy top, we're gonna stretch it a little bit, we're gonna push it down, and we're gonna push down on that seam nice and hard. See that? And then we're gonna start to roll it towards ourselves, stretching and rolling and using our thumbs to push down into that seam, making sure we don't forget the edges. I was notorious for forgetting the edges for a really long time. Just gonna pull that towards us, maybe flatten out the bottom a little bit. Just gonna keep pulling, and keep pulling. And you see how that top is nice and taut? All right, so we're here. We've got a little bit of the bottom sticking out there. Thumbs again, and we're just gonna push that under and tuck it nice and tight. And there we go. That, maybe spin it around, tighten her up a wee bit more. But you see we've got a nice smooth top, the bottoms are tucked, and the seam is clear and underneath, right? So that is just gonna get dropped straight into our sandwich tin. Just like that. Now, in terms of proofing, I'm gonna suggest that this is probably gonna take about an hour, but I'm gonna start checking it at the 40-minute mark. A lot of people, including myself, like to think of proofing as a window, right? So if you've got underproofed over here, and you've got overproofed over here, within this bit is a window, which would be like perfectly proofed, or like functionally proofed, I would say. Now, different people have different ideas of what perfectly proofed bread is. Some people might like it just on the side of functionally proofed. Some people might like it almost overproofed. It really is up to you. That's kind of like a thing with proving. You can do all your poke tests and you can do all your stuff, but like, at the end of the day, it comes down to experience. If you just make a bunch of loaves, eventually you'll just get better at making them. Okay, so I checked it about 40 minutes and I gave it a little bit longer. It's been just a tiny bit over an hour, but here is our sandwich loaf. It's ready to go. It's passing the poke test. And part of the reason that I know that it's proved as well is because I have made so many of these, this size of sandwich loaf, both at like work and at home and stuff like that. When the dome just starts to peak over the edges, it's a pretty good indicator that it's pretty close. If you're using an 800 gram piece of dough in an 800 gram tin. The big commercial ovens that you get, they have steam injection. A lot of them are like fully plumbed. So you just press a button and it'll flood the chamber with steam and it'll get everything nice and gelatinous so everything can spring really gorgeously and form a nice crust. We can't really do that at home. This is generally the closest that we've gotten. I've tested a bunch of methods. I really like the Dutch oven method for stuff like sourdoughs and cobs and stuff like that. But for doing something like a sandwich loaf, something where we can't really be restricted by the size of a Dutch oven, we need something a little bit bigger, this is the method that I choose to use. I've done the ice method. It doesn't do much for me. I've got my kettle nice and boiled here. I'm gonna put this into the oven. I'm gonna dump a cup of boiling water into the cast iron skillet to flood it with steam. And then I'm gonna open the door and I'm gonna spray it with water at 30-second intervals, right? That's how I'm gonna mimic the steaming properties of like a commercial big dog oven. And we're gonna do that 3 times. And then we're gonna drop the temperature by 20 degrees and then we're gonna finish baking it as normally. Make sure you put a tea towel over the door when you pour the boiling water in, because if you spill water on the oven glass, it can shatter and it will really fucking ruin your day. This is probably gonna take about half an hour to bake, but we're gonna start checking it at 20 minutes. Okay, so it's been about half an hour, maybe 35 minutes. We're gonna pull out our sandwich loaf. Have a look at that stunning, lovely tall boy. Hey? So you know for sure that it's done when you tap the bottom and it sounds hollow. Here, I'll do it next to the mic. It's got that gorgeous rip down the side, which is just like so evocative of like Australian country bakehouse bread. Now it's really important that we don't cut into this until it's completely cool. If we do, we're gonna completely ruin the texture and like the longevity of the loaf, like the shelf life's gonna get completely ruined. Inside, this is still like really hot and it's still not entirely stable. When that fully cools down and that steam is like reabsorbed back into the actual bread, you'll be able to cut it open and get that nice like fluffy crumb. There you go, one incredibly rustic, very lean, no dairy, no sugar sandwich loaf. Good for whatever ails ya. Okay, so the second thing that we're gonna make out of this dough is a more artisanal sort of shape called a Vienna or a petard. It's a longer sort of freestanding loaf that's generally associated with hearth baking. You often find them as like sourdoughs and pain de castas and stuff like that. We're gonna make one out of just our regular lean white dough, and we're gonna bake it in this. This is a cast iron Dutch oven. This is a fairly cheap Baccarat one that I got at a Robin's Kitchen closing down sale. You know, the ones that never end. We're gonna bake our loaf in this to steam it instead of using the steaming method that we did before. Now, the recipe that I've included for this is half the weight of the sandwich loaf. One of the downsides to baking in a Dutch oven is that you are limited to the size of the Dutch oven, you know? You can't exactly put like a sandwich tin or, you know, the same style of loaf. By the time it finished proving, it would be like all up on the sides and it'd be a fucking mess. So we're gonna get into hand mixing this one because, you know, like I said before, not everybody has a stand mixer. It's a nice thing to have, but you definitely don't need one to make this kind of bread. So the principles of mixing this are the same as when we were doing it with the stand mixer. So the first stage is going to be the mixing phase or the incorporation phase. So in goes our flour, in goes our yeast. Now remember, we're not using improver this time. This is just to demonstrate that the recipe still functions for those of you who might not be super cool eating something called bread improver. So this is just flour and yeast. We're just gonna mix these very gently with our hand, just to get them nice and combined. Remember, we're gonna hold back the salt because we're gonna do our same fermentolyse trick on this as well. We are gonna add the water that's got a little bit of oil in it. Just gonna pour that right in the middle. This is like a plastic spatula. I think it's the one that, like the free one that I got with my Kenwood anyway. Just scoop around the sides and just sort of pull it towards the center. It's kind of like folding at this stage. You just wanna get all the flour hydrated. Not trying to do anything really crazy just yet. Just scoop it around to pull it through. And eventually you'll realize that this is just a pain in the ass and you just want to use your hands anyway, which is what I would have done in the first place. I just wanted to demonstrate something. Cool, so for this mixing stage and hydrating things, just sort of hand in. I like to squeeze a bit. For some reason that makes me feel like I'm combining things a bit better. And then eventually when you're starting to get this kind of shaggy mass, right? Hand again as a scoop, you want to go underneath and then palm down. So underneath, fold, and then palm down, right? And after a bit of practice, you'll get into a nice rhythm. Yeah, see? You just kind of pull it around and just push your palm down on it. And look at that. In a matter of minutes, in a matter of seconds even, we've got this dough mixed well enough to start our fermentolyse. So what we're gonna do, now that everything is a single cohesive mass, is we're gonna get another plate and we're gonna put it over, we're not pie dish, we're gonna get a pie dish and we're gonna put that over the top. Oh, see, that's nice. You can see through it and stuff too. And we're gonna leave that again for about 10 minutes just to let that sort of flour hydrate and for that fermentolyse to develop a little bit of the gluten for us. Okay, so just like before, it's been like a 10-minute fermentolyse, and as we can see, the dough, it's stretchier again, like the gluten has started to form on its own. So what we're gonna do now is add in our salt, the salt that we held back before. I'm just gonna sprinkle that over the top, and we're gonna settle into either the very therapeutic or the very arduous process of hand kneading something. There is no need to get this out of the bowl. You can knead the whole thing in the bowl so it stays nice and clean. And we're just gonna keep doing that motion of just pulling out and pushing down. Pulling out, pushing down, pulling out, pushing down. Now it's gonna feel real gritty because you've just put salt in it and you're gonna be like, oh, why is the salt not incorporating? It is gonna incorporate. You just gotta stay at it for a little bit. Now, I'm gonna go at this for about 5 minutes before I do like a window pane test. So you could like put a podcast on, you could put a YouTube video on your phone, you could subscribe to this fucking channel, or you could listen to Shelter from the Storm. Go listen to Bob Dylan's Shelter from the Storm. So it's been exactly one Shelter from the Storm, which is a exactly 5-minute song. There you go. As you can see, we're getting towards that stage of being like smooth and lively and elastic, but as you can see, it is still ripping a little bit, right? So if we try to do that window pane test like we did before, already tell it's probably not gonna stretch quite as far as it did. Don't get me wrong, it is still stretching and we are still getting some nice window painting, but it is tearing a bit earlier. So I'm probably gonna give this about another 5 minutes of hand kneading, and then I reckon we're gonna be just about good. I feel like this is a really good test of how good a bread flour is, you know, because flour varies a lot. Like, you want a bread flour for this sort of thing. You want something with like a lot of protein, because that is what's going to help give you gluten, right? So bread flours, I believe, typically range between about 11 and 13% protein. This Lighthouse one that we're using now is 11.9, which is, you know, pretty much bang on the middle of the range. But some of the organic heritage stone ground sort of things can get up to like 12.5 I've used before. 12.5 is like pretty standard in a lot of commercial bakeries. That's kind of the stuff that like you can order on wholesale and stuff like that. But I like the Lighthouse flour because it's easy to get. It's generally pretty cheap and, you know, it works pretty consistently. I'm not gonna say that you can't use all-purpose flour for this sort of thing, but you will struggle a lot and you'll never quite get the results that you would get from like a good, strong bread flour. All right, so it's been exactly 2 shelters from the storm. As we can see, this dough, definitely getting there, definitely getting stretchier. Let's try a little window pane test again. You can tell it's getting there when it's like difficult to pull a piece off to window pane. Just gonna round that up gently. Ooh, yeah, this feels good. So there we go. Window painting nicely. That was pretty much bang on 10 minutes worth of hand kneading, and I'm pretty happy with that, considering that's not got any improver in it. We are gonna boule this boy up, and we are gonna put it back in its thing, and where did that pie dish go? And we are gonna let that go for about 40 minutes, just like we did with the sandwich loaf. Okay, so our Vienna dough has been resting for about 40 minutes. So we've got lots of nice yeast activity in here. So we're gonna pull this out. I'm gonna get this bouled back up again. Same sort of thing as last time. We're just gonna sort of tension it a wee bit. So in terms of shaping, what we're gonna do is really similar to what we did with our sandwich loaf. So we're gonna flip it over. We're gonna press it quite flat so we get sort of more of a rectangle, right? Like before, I'll show you again. Pull up. We're gonna pull up, push down. I want to get on that seam. I want to really push it into that dough there, and then we're just going to roll it towards ourselves. Using our thumbs to keep tension, spread the bottom out, finish her off just like that. Flip it around, tighten her up. Make sure we don't forget about the ends. See these little bits? We want to get them nice and tucked under. Nice, tight, taut top. That's what we want. Sort of using our thumbs and our fingers, if you sort of think about rolling it back and forth, thumbs pushing forward, fingers pulling back. Get that seam nice and on the bottom. And that there is going to be our little Vienna. Nice little self-contained freestanding loaf. I can feel it's nice and strong because it's making sort of more of a tube rather than being like a dumpy little flat boy. And I'm just going to throw that onto this little quarter sheet pan with some baking paper, just so I can move it around and put it somewhere nice and warm to proof. And yeah, there we go. Just like the sandwich loaf, I'm expecting it to take about an hour. I'm gonna start checking it at the 40-minute mark. So our Vienna is finished proving. Our Dutch oven is preheated. What we're gonna do now is dust this with a little bit of flour, score it so it has a controlled place to expand, and then we're gonna drop it into the Dutch oven and let it bake. So this is just regular all-purpose flour. We're just gonna sprinkle a little bit of that on there. We're just gonna smooth it down a little bit with our fingers. This is gonna do a few things. One, it's gonna look really cool, and 2, it's gonna stop our knife from dragging and tearing the top. Speaking of knife, this is just a regular steak knife. I'm not using a bread lame or anything fancy. This is just a regular steak knife. Just gonna put down a trivet, so I've got something to put the Dutch oven on so I don't ruin my countertop. Out we come. This is very hot. This has been preheating at 240 degrees for about half an hour. Very hot. We're gonna take our knife and we're gonna think about making 3 or 4 just straight lines. Just, we're gonna start in a position, we're gonna pull towards us. So, first one, 1, 2, 3, we're gonna do 4. That's gonna do a few things. That's gonna control the expansion of the bread so the top doesn't rip like it did with the sandwich loaf. That's a very rustic thing that we were going for. We don't want that with this. We want this to be clean and uniform. It's also gonna look really cool. So we're just gonna lift this up by the paper and just plop it into the Dutch oven like that, right? Now, keep in mind, this is all incredibly hot, so be very careful with all of this. We're gonna put the lid back on, and then we're gonna put it in the oven. That's gonna take about 20 minutes, and then we're gonna pull the lid off and let it finish baking. What that Dutch oven's doing is we're putting that bread in a really hot environment, and what's gonna happen is all the water in that dough is gonna evaporate, and the Dutch oven's gonna keep it sealed inside, making it its own little steam chamber, right? That's gonna keep that crust gelatinous, and it's gonna let it spring and rise as much as it needs to in the oven. Our Vienna has been baking in our Dutch oven for about 20 minutes. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna pull it out, we're gonna take the lid off, and then we're gonna put it back in so it can finish browning up and get really nice and crusty and delicious. Oh goodness. Oh my goodness. Have a look at that, right? So that's sprung gorgeously. You can see it's opening up along those score lines. So we're gonna throw that back in the oven for about another 20 minutes to get it really nice and crusty. And we're gonna bring the temperature down from about 220 to about 200. We've had the Vienna baking, crusting up without the lid on for about 25 minutes now. We're gonna pull it out and see how she looks. Oh, have a look at this boy. Oh, look at that. Given that this is not like a sourdough or like a panna di casa or like something more in like the artisanal realm, A white instant dough like this is probably not often going to get baked in a Dutch oven using that kind of artisanal method. This is kind of just like a fun little experiment and something else that you can do if you don't have like a loaf pan or something, or you want to make this kind of bread, you want to make this kind of like really rustic white bread. You've got to work with the stuff that you've got sometime. That being said, if you went to like a dinner party and someone was like, yo, I'm bringing some hot crab dip, could you bring like a nice little crusty thing that we can just like cut up and we can just like dip in and just go to town? This would be fantastic. Why did I go with hot crab dip? Just like the sandwich bread, we are not going to cut into this. We are not going to touch. Ooh, hang on. You know that bit in Ratatouille? Oh. Okay, so we've got the exact same amount of dough that we had for our sandwich loaf, right? So this is an 800 gram piece of dough. What we're gonna do for this last thing is we're gonna cut this into 8 100 gram pieces and we're gonna shape some rolls. We're gonna do 4 round rolls for something like burgers or like a nice like salad sandwich or something like that. And we're gonna do 4 long rolls for something like a hot dog. With rolls, one of the first things that we need to do is round them so we can give them a little bench rest so we can relax the gluten a bit before we shape. Rounding is pretty simple. Just sort of pretend that you like hold your hand like a cup. Pretend you may be holding like a tennis ball or a cricket ball. Just wanna bring it around the outside there and just kind of round it. See how we're sort of pushing that skin underneath? That's about it, right? We don't need a whole lot of tension in these just yet. We just need enough that we can start organizing the gluten. Okay, so what we're gonna do is drape these with a tea towel and give them 10 minutes. Cool, so it's been 10 minutes. As you can see, these are really soft and malleable and easy to go, right? We'll do the round rolls first because they're a bit easier. All we need to do is take it and just make that rounding motion again and just tighten it up, right? This time we want it really quite tight. That's what's gonna give us a nice round roll and not like a dome. So get all of that underneath there. See how that's pretty much just like a ball? That's exactly what we want, right? Very simple. I always recommend starting with round rolls. Because once you can do this, you can make a cob or a boule. You know, you can do just about anything. So there are 4 round rolls. We're gonna put them on our sheet tray over here. Proofing. Now, long rolls have a little bit of an extra step, but it's very similar to shaping our sandwich loaves. So we're gonna flip it upside down, pound it nice and flat, just using these 3 fingers there. Once we get sort of something that vaguely resembles a rectangle, just pull that up. It's just the exact same thing, just on a much smaller scale. Make sure that seam's nice and tucked. Pull it towards, push it down. You get to about here, same as always, tuck your seam underneath. And then if you cross your hands over each other, you can sort of start in the middle and push outwards and you can sort of decide how long you want it to be. I personally reckon that's a good length there, right? Now, do you see how my dough is shrinking? So I'll show you one more time. Get it out to about there and you see how my dough is shrinking? Right? It's gonna resist the shaping a little bit until the gluten fully relaxes. Now, luckily we don't need it much longer than that. If we did wanna make something much longer, what we need to do is sort of leave that to rest for another 10 minutes and then stretch it out a little bit further. Luckily, that's as far as we're going today. So we're just gonna finish tightening that up and jobs are good. There's a long roll. All right, so here are our 8 rolls. We've got 4 long, 4 round. These are gonna take about an hour to prove up. And then they're gonna go in and they're gonna get steam baked with the same method that we did for the sandwich loaf. So our rolls are ready to go in the oven. It's been about an hour. They're nice and poofy and they're passing the poke test. We're gonna use the exact same steaming method that we did for the sandwich loaf, but instead of dropping the temperature down to 220, we're gonna drop it all the way down to 200 and bake them for 20 minutes. Have a look at those bastards. It's really important to, whenever you do something like this, get it straight onto a cooling rack. Don't let bread cool down in a pan. There we go. That's a nice little like rustic round rolls. I can feel how like light and fluffy they are. This would be perfect for like a burger, perfect for like a salad sandwich. You can put them in the kids' lunches if that's the thing that you gotta do. You have them with like stew and stuff like that. These make a great little hot dog. Just get like a brat, cut it down, get some nice like strong mustard or something like that. You'll have a great time. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Bradley's Bakehouse. I hope you got something from this, even if it's just the desire to maybe make some more simple, rustic, yeasted breads. The one thing that I really want to impress on this is that it's definitely possible to make really nice sandwich loaves, really nice rolls and stuff like that without using like butter, eggs, milk, and sugar. Those things are nice to have and there's a time and place for them, but they're absolutely not a necessity. You can make a very, very good sandwich loaf just by using flour, salt, water, and yeast. Hope this video gave you some inspiration to try any things. Remember, the recipes for all of these are down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching.